The crack of the tile under my fist was like the shattering of everything I thought I knew. I never imagined that a simple bathroom project would rip open years of secrets and pain that I had buried alongside those old floors. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Ethel, and I'm 76 years old. I've lived in the same cramped two-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York, for over 40 years now. Every morning, I wake to the same creaks in the floorboards, the sour smell of our old radiator rattling to life, and the distant hum of subway trains carrying people to lives I can only imagine. The wallpaper in our kitchen is the same faded yellow roses I hung in 1982. The linoleum in the hallway curls at the edges, and sometimes I catch my slippers on those corners, stumbling like my whole life has become one long stumble. My days stretch before me like an empty avenue, filled with the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The only sounds are Robert's heavy footsteps above me when he bothers to get out of bed, or the sharp slam of cabinet doors when he's looking for something to complain about. My husband of 51 years has grown colder with each passing season, like winter has taken permanent residence in his heart. His words have become weapons, sharp and cutting, designed to remind me of every failure, every disappointment I've supposedly caused him. But lately, something changed in Robert. Something that made my stomach twist with unease every time I caught him counting bills at the kitchen table, his weathered fingers sliding 20s and 50s into neat little piles. For a man who hasn't held a steady job in over a decade, who used to complain about every grocery receipt, this sudden flush of cash seemed impossible. He'd stuff the money into his jacket pocket with a satisfied grunt, like a secret he was savoring. When I asked where it came from, his eyes would narrow into slits. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it," he'd say. But there was nothing affectionate in those words. They dripped with the kind of condescension that makes you feel small, invisible, worthless. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning in March, Robert announced over his burnt toast and instant coffee that he was going to retile our bathroom floor himself. The way he said it, with that smug glint dancing in his pale blue eyes, made me pause mid-sip of my tea. "I'll save us a fortune," he declared, spreading grape jelly with the same precision he used to use when he worked as an accountant, back when he still had pride in his work. "These contractors, they'll rob you blind. I can do better than any of them." I wanted to remind him that his last attempt at home improvement had been hanging a picture frame, which now sat crooked on our bedroom wall after 3 failed attempts to level it. But I bit my tongue, swallowed my doubts along with my lukewarm tea. After all these years, I'd learned that questioning Robert only led to doors slamming and days of cold silence that felt like punishment. For weeks, he worked on that bathroom floor. The sound of his hammer against tiles echoed through our thin walls at all hours. He'd emerge covered in dust and grout, wearing a satisfied expression I hadn't seen in years. He ordered expensive materials, Italian tiles that cost more than our monthly grocery budget, imported grout that came in small, precious containers. When I dared to ask how we could afford such luxury, he waved me away like I was an annoying fly. "I told you not to worry about it," he snapped. "For once in your life, just be grateful." Grateful. The word stuck in my throat like a bone. Grateful for what? For feeling like a stranger in my own home? For walking on eggshells around a man who used to laugh at my jokes and bring me daisies from the corner bodega? But one evening, as Robert snored in his favorite armchair upstairs, the television glowing blue against his slack face, I found myself standing in our half-finished bathroom. The air smelled of dust and something else I couldn't identify, something that reminded me of old basements and forgotten secrets. One of the tiles had cracked during installation, creating a jagged line that seemed to mock the perfection Robert had been pursuing. I don't know what came over me in that moment. Maybe it was years of swallowed questions, decades of being told not to worry my pretty little head. Maybe it was the way that crack seemed to mirror every fracture in our marriage, every break that had never been properly repaired. I went to the kitchen, my bare feet silent against the cold linoleum, and returned with a hammer from Robert's toolbox. The first blow sent spider web cracks spreading across the ceramic surface. The second shattered it completely. But as the pieces fell away, exposing the subflooring beneath, my breath caught in my throat. There was something there. Something that didn't belong. A small metal box, corroded green at the edges, was nestled in a carefully carved hollow beneath where the tiles should have been. My hands shook as I pried it loose, the metal cold and rough against my palms. Inside, wrapped in yellowed plastic, were bundles of cash. Hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars in various denominations. Beneath the money were photographs, old Polaroids of faces I didn't recognize, and a stack of documents that made my blood run cold. Investment statements, stock portfolios, Bitcoin wallet information scrawled on napkins in Robert's familiar handwriting. Numbers that made my head spin, amounts that seemed impossible for a man who complained about the cost of milk. My husband, who had let me work 2 minimum-wage cleaning jobs to keep us afloat when he lost his position at the accounting firm, had been sitting on what appeared to be a small fortune. The documents told a story I couldn't fully piece together, but the numbers were clear. Stock market investments that had paid off spectacularly, cryptocurrency purchases from years ago that had multiplied in value, real estate transactions in neighborhoods I'd never heard of, and at the bottom of the pile, a handwritten note in Robert's script. He doesn't need to know. Let her keep scrubbing floors. I sank onto the bathroom's cold tile floor, the papers scattered around me like evidence of a crime I couldn't name. Tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and hot, as the weight of his deception settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. How long had he been hiding this from me? How long had he watched me count pennies at the grocery store, choosing between meat and vegetables because we couldn't afford both, while he sat on assets worth more than our apartment building? The worst part wasn't even the money. It was what that note revealed about how he saw me. Not as a partner, not as someone worthy of honesty or respect, but as someone to be managed, deceived, kept in the dark for his convenience. Let her keep scrubbing floors. Let her believe we're poor while I make investments and accumulate wealth like some kind of secret millionaire. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed listening to Robert's labored breathing, studying the ceiling cracks that looked like a map of all the places I'd never been allowed to go. Everything made sense now. The expensive tiles, his smugness, the way he'd grown even more dismissive and cruel over the past months, like my ignorance was amusing to him. But what kept me awake wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization of how completely I'd disappeared from my own life. When had I become someone who could be lied to so casually? When had my opinion become so worthless that major financial decisions could be made without even consulting me? When had I become invisible in my own marriage? I thought about our early days, when Robert would bring me flowers from the Korean market on Northern Boulevard, when he'd hold my hand on the subway and make me laugh until other passengers smiled at us. We'd been so young, so full of plans. We were going to travel, see the world, build something beautiful together. Instead, we'd become strangers sharing the same address, roommates with a marriage certificate gathering dust in a drawer somewhere. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Scrambled eggs, slightly burned toast, coffee that was never quite hot enough. Robert came downstairs wearing his bathrobe and that satisfied expression that had become so familiar. He ate in silence, scrolling through his phone, occasionally grunting approval at something on the screen. "The bathroom looks good," I said carefully, setting down my coffee cup. "Those tiles are beautiful." He looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Finally noticed, did you? Cost a pretty penny, but sometimes you have to invest in quality." Where did the money come from, Robert? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, and I watched his face change, the satisfaction melting into something harder, more calculated. "I told you not to worry about it." I am worried about it. We've been struggling for years. And suddenly you're buying imported tiles like we're millionaires. I have a right to know where our money comes from." He set down his fork with deliberate precision, the way he used to organize his desk when he was preparing to deliver bad news to a client. "Our money? You mean my money? Last I checked, you weren't contributing much to the household finances." The words hit like a slap, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I worked 2 jobs when you were unemployed. I cleaned office buildings until my knees gave out. I kept us afloat when you—" "When I what?" His voice rose, challenging. "When I was going through a rough patch? When I needed support from my wife instead of constant nagging about bills? That rough patch lasted 15 years, Robert." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "You want to know where the money comes from? Fine. I made some smart investments. Bought some stock when prices were low, got into Bitcoin early, made some real estate deals. You know, the kind of thing you need brains for. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't understand. Because every time I've tried to do something ambitious, you've found a way to worry it to death. Because I needed to focus without your constant questions and complaints weighing me down." I stared at him, this man I'd shared most of my adult life with, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "How much money are we talking about?" His smile was cold, victorious. "More than you could spend in several lifetimes if you kept living like you do now." Several lifetimes. While I'd been choosing generic brands at the grocery store and mending clothes until they fell apart, he'd been sitting on wealth that could have changed everything. Could have paid for the medical specialists I'd needed but couldn't afford. Could have fixed the heating system that left me shivering through winter nights. Could have given us the life we'd once dreamed of. "We could have traveled," I whispered. "We could have seen Europe like we always talked about." "You could barely handle a trip to Manhattan," he scoffed. "What would you do in Europe? Complain about the food and worry about the exchange rate?" Each word was designed to cut, to remind me of my place in his newly constructed hierarchy. I wasn't a partner who deserved honesty. I was a liability to be managed, a burden who might interfere with his financial genius. That afternoon, while Robert was out at what he claimed was a doctor's appointment, but which I now suspected was a meeting with his investment advisor, I called our daughter Sarah in Brooklyn. "Mom?" Her voice sounded distracted, like I'd interrupted something important. "Is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something. Has your father ever mentioned money to you? Investments? Anything about our financial situation?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "What do you mean? Sarah, honey, has he told you we have money? More money than I know about?" Another pause. Then quietly, "Mom, I can't really discuss Dad's business affairs with you. That's between you two." My heart sank. She knew. Our daughter knew about Robert's secret wealth and had been keeping it from me, probably at his request. How many family conversations had I been excluded from? How many decisions about my own life had been made without me in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter? "How long have you known?" "Mom, you're putting me in a really difficult position here." "How long, Sarah?" A sigh that carried years of guilt. "A couple years, maybe more. Dad said you got anxious about money, that it was better for your health if you didn't know about the investments. He said you'd just worry yourself sick trying to manage it all." Better for my health. As if poverty and stress and feeling worthless were good for anyone's health. As if being deceived by your own family was some kind of medical treatment. "I have to go, Mom. The kids need dinner, and Tom's working late again." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at our ancient rotary phone, a relic from when we couldn't afford to upgrade, when every expense had to be justified and debated. Except apparently, they didn't need to be justified. At least not to me. I tried calling our son Michael next, but it went straight to voicemail. His recorded voice, so much like his father's, asked me to leave a message, and I almost did. Almost poured out everything I'd discovered, all the hurt and confusion and betrayal. But what was the point? If Sarah knew and had kept it secret, chances were good that Michael was part of the conspiracy too. That's when the real loneliness hit me. Not just the absence of company, but the realization that I'd been living in a different reality than everyone else in my family. While I'd been struggling with grocery budgets and feeling guilty about every small purchase, they'd all known the truth. They'd watched me worry and scrimp and deny myself basic comforts, and no one had thought to tell me it wasn't necessary. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through our apartment with new eyes. The threadbare furniture I'd apologized for when guests visited. The coat I'd been wearing for 8 winters because we couldn't afford a new one. The prescription medication I'd skipped doses of to make bottles last longer. Every sacrifice had been unnecessary. Performed for an audience that knew better, but let me continue anyway. When Robert came home that evening, he was in an unusually good mood. He whistled while hanging up his jacket, something he hadn't done in years. "Good day?" I asked from the kitchen, where I was preparing the inexpensive chicken thighs I'd bought on sale. "Very good. Market's been kind to me lately." He settled into his chair at our small table, unfolding a napkin with the precision of someone who never questioned whether he deserved nice things. "Smells good in here." "Robert, I called Sarah today." His fork paused on its way to his mouth. "Oh? She knows about your investments." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, I could hear the Johnsons' television through the thin walls, a laugh track from some sitcom that seemed to be mocking us. "I asked her not to say anything," he said finally. "Why?" "Because I know you, Ethel. You would have found a way to worry about it, to complicate things. This way, you could just live your life without stress." Without stress. I set down my water glass harder than necessary. I've been stressed about money for decades. I've lost sleep worrying about bills, about retirement, about what would happen if one of us got sick and needed expensive treatment. "Well, now you can stop worrying." But I couldn't stop worrying because I didn't know there was nothing to worry about. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Don't you see how cruel that is? Letting me suffer when there was no reason for it?" He sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a patient man dealing with an unreasonable woman. "I was protecting you." "From what?" "From making mistakes. From wanting to spend money on foolish things. From interfering with investment strategies you wouldn't understand." There it was again, the assumption that I was too stupid, too emotional, too female to handle financial information. Never mind that I'd managed our household budget for decades, stretching every dollar until it screamed. Never mind that I'd worked multiple jobs and never bounced a check or missed a payment. None of that mattered because Robert had decided I couldn't be trusted with the truth about our own financial situation. "What kind of foolish things did you think I'd want to spend money on?" "I don't know. Clothes, probably. Expensive food. Maybe you'd want to help the kids with their mortgages or something equally pointless." Equally pointless. Helping our children, who were struggling with student loans and daycare costs and all the same financial pressures we'd once faced, was pointless to him. Making sure our grandchildren had what they needed was foolish. Taking care of family, the thing I'd spent my entire adult life doing, was a waste of money in Robert's opinion. "How much money are we talking about exactly?" He hesitated, cutting his chicken into precise, small pieces. "Enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting tonight." I stared at him across our small table. This man who had become a stranger wearing my husband's face. The Robert I'd married would never have hoarded wealth while letting me feel poor. The Robert I'd married would have been excited to share good news, to plan adventures, to build a better life together. This Robert saw me as an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved through deception. That night, I lay awake again. But this time I wasn't just hurt and confused. I was angry. 40 years of marriage, 51 years of life together, and he thought so little of me that he could rewrite our entire reality without consultation. He could watch me suffer unnecessarily and call it protection. He could exclude me from decisions about my own life and call it wisdom. The next morning, I made a decision that scared me more than I'd ever been scared of anything in my life. I called the Queens County Bar Association and asked for a referral to a lawyer who handled family financial matters. My hands shook as I dialed the number they gave me, and my voice cracked when I explained that I needed help understanding my husband's financial holdings. "Mrs. Patterson," the lawyer's secretary said kindly, "Mr. Goldstein can see you Thursday at 2 o'clock. Is that convenient?" Convenient. Nothing about this situation was convenient. But I said yes anyway, because for the first time in years, I was going to get answers that weren't filtered through Robert's perception of what I could handle. Wednesday night, Robert worked late on the bathroom tiles again. The sound of his hammer echoed through our thin walls, punctuated by satisfied grunts when he got a tile positioned just right. I sat in our living room, surrounded by bank statements and tax documents I'd found hidden in his desk drawer, trying to piece together the scope of his deception. The numbers were staggering. Stock portfolios worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Cryptocurrency holdings that had multiplied in value beyond anything I could have imagined. Real estate investments in emerging neighborhoods that had paid off spectacularly. And at the center of it all, a man who had let his wife believe they were one emergency away from financial disaster. I found records of dividend payments that exceeded my annual income from those cleaning jobs. Interest and capital gains that could have paid for the medical procedures I'd foregone because we couldn't afford them. Returns on investments that could have funded college educations for our grandchildren. Vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. A comfortable retirement that didn't require choosing between heating and eating. But what hurt most were the notes in Robert's handwriting scattered throughout the files. Reminders to himself about keeping transactions hidden. Instructions to his broker about maintaining separate accounts. Plans for investments that specifically excluded me from any knowledge or benefit. It wasn't just that he'd hidden money from me. He'd actively worked to ensure I never found out, never participated, never benefited from the wealth he was accumulating. One note, paper-clipped to a particularly large dividend statement, stopped my heart. Keep E focused on household management. She's better at small-scale thinking. This requires vision she doesn't have. Small-scale thinking. After decades of making every dollar stretch, of finding ways to create comfort and security from almost nothing, of building a home and raising children on a shoestring budget, he'd reduced my intelligence and capability to small-scale thinking. The same skills that had kept us afloat during his unemployment, that had maintained our household and our family relationships, that had created warmth and love from very little money, were dismissed as insignificant. Thursday afternoon, I sat in Mr. Goldstein's office in downtown Flushing, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. He was younger than my son Michael, with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that reminded me of the doctors who'd delivered bad news over the years. "Mrs. Patterson, based on what you've brought me, your husband has accumulated significant assets during your marriage. In New York State, you have legal rights to information about marital property, regardless of whose name is on the accounts." "Legal rights," I repeated. The words felt foreign in my mouth. "Your husband cannot legally hide assets from you, and he certainly cannot make major financial decisions about marital property without your knowledge. What he's done is not just morally questionable, it's potentially illegal." I thought about Robert upstairs in our apartment, carefully laying tiles over the secret compartment where he'd hidden evidence of his other life. How fitting that he'd literally buried his deception under our bathroom floor, a place I visited every day without knowing I was walking over lies. What can I do? Several things. We can file for full financial disclosure. We can request forensic accounting to determine exactly what assets exist and when they were acquired. We can explore your options for protecting your interests, including legal separation if that's something you want to consider. Legal separation. The words hung in the air like a bird I was afraid to catch. After 51 years of marriage, was I really contemplating the end of everything we'd built together? But then I remembered that note. Keep E focused on household management, and realized that maybe what we'd built had been a lie from the beginning. I need to think about this, I told Mr. Goldstein, gathering my papers with hands that shook slightly. Of course. But Mrs. Patterson, I want you to understand something. You deserve honesty from your spouse. You deserve to be treated as an equal partner in your marriage. Financial deception is a form of abuse, and you don't have to accept it just because you've accepted it for a long time. Abuse. I'd never thought of Robert's secrecy in those terms, but as I rode the bus home through Queens, watching familiar neighborhoods scroll past the window, I began to understand what the lawyer meant. Robert had caused me to suffer unnecessarily. He had withheld resources that could have improved my life, my health, my happiness. He had lied to me systematically, recruited our children into his deception, and made me feel worthless and burdensome when we had more than enough money to live comfortably. If that wasn't abuse, what was it? That evening, I caught Robert counting bills again in the kitchen. Hundreds and fifties, sorted into neat piles like he was playing some elaborate game of Monopoly. When he saw me watching, he didn't have the grace to look embarrassed. Instead, he slid the money into his jacket pocket with a satisfied smile. "Good day on the market," he said. "I saw a lawyer today." The smile disappeared so quickly I almost missed it. His face went completely blank, the way it used to when his boss called him into the office for meetings that never went well. "What kind of lawyer?" "The kind who knows about marital property laws. The kind who can help me understand what I'm legally entitled to know about our finances." Robert set down his coffee cup very carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter something important. "Ethel, you're being dramatic. We don't need lawyers involved in our marriage. We didn't need deception involved in our marriage either. But here we are. I told you, I was protecting you." "From what exactly? From being able to afford medicine when I was sick? From buying clothes that fit properly? From helping our grandchildren with college expenses? What horrible fate were you protecting me from?" He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "You don't understand how money works. You never have. If I'd told you about the investments, you would have found ways to spend it all on nonsense." "Like what?" "Like helping every relative with every sob story. Like buying expensive things we don't need. Like," he gestured around our shabby apartment, "upgrading this place when it's perfectly fine as it is." Perfectly fine. Our apartment with its peeling wallpaper and broken heating, its cracked tiles and ancient appliances, was perfectly fine for me to live in while he accumulated wealth that could have bought us a house in a good neighborhood. It was perfectly fine for me to endure discomfort and deprivation while he played stock market genius in secret. What about travel? What about seeing the world like we used to talk about? What would you do in Paris? Complain about the language barrier? Worry about the expense? You're not built for that kind of life, Ethel. Not built for that kind of life. After decades of marriage, my husband had decided I wasn't sophisticated enough for the life his money could buy. I was good enough to clean apartments and raise children and manage household budgets with pocket change. But I wasn't worthy of first-class travel or nice restaurants or the kind of retirement I'd dreamed about. How long have the kids known? His pause was answer enough, but he tried to minimize it anyway. I mentioned some investments to Michael last year when he was worried about his mortgage. Sarah found out when she helped me set up online banking. And you all decided I shouldn't know. We decided you didn't need to be burdened with complicated financial information. Burdened. Knowing the truth about my own life was a burden I couldn't handle. Being treated as an equal partner in my marriage was too complicated for my simple mind. Being given the same information available to my adult children was beyond my capabilities. I thought about all the times I'd apologized to friends for our modest lifestyle, explaining that we were on a fixed income, that we had to be careful with money. I thought about the charity events I'd skipped because I couldn't afford appropriate clothes, the family celebrations I'd attended with homemade gifts, while everyone else brought store-bought presents. I thought about the shame I'd carried, the sense that we were failing somehow, falling behind while everyone else prospered. All of it unnecessary. All of it performed for an audience that knew better. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bedroom. Instead, I made a bed on the living room couch, wrapping myself in the afghan my mother had crocheted 40 years ago. Through the thin walls, I could hear Robert moving around upstairs, probably wondering why I hadn't followed him to bed as I had every night for half a century. I thought about my mother, gone now for 15 years, and wondered what she would have said about Robert's deception. She'd grown up during the Depression, had understood the value of money and the importance of honesty in marriage. She'd pinched pennies because she had to, not because her husband was hiding wealth from her for her own good. A marriage is a partnership, she used to say. If one person is making all the decisions, it's not a marriage, it's employment, and employment can always be terminated. Employment. Is that what I'd become in Robert's eyes? An employee whose job was household management, whose performance was adequate enough to keep around but who didn't need to know about company finances? Was I hired help, who happened to share his bed, useful enough to maintain but not valuable enough to trust with important information? The next morning, Robert came downstairs tentatively, like he wasn't sure what kind of reception he'd receive. I was already dressed, sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the morning paper spread before me. "You slept on the couch," he observed. "Yes." That can't have been comfortable. It wasn't. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me, but he kept glancing toward the door as if he was planning an escape route. "Ethel, I think we need to talk." I think we needed to talk about 20 years ago, but you decided I couldn't handle it. You're angry. I'm furious. What can I do to fix this? The question caught me off guard. In 51 years of marriage, Robert had never asked what he could do to fix anything. Problems were either ignored until they went away or declared unfixable and abandoned. The idea that my anger was something that could be addressed, rather than endured or dismissed, was completely foreign to our relationship. "You can start by telling me exactly how much money we have." He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with directness. "It's complicated. So is rebuilding trust after decades of lies. But here we are." A long pause, then, "About $2 million in various investments. Maybe a little more, depending on market performance. $2 million. While I'd been rationing prescription medications and shopping at thrift stores, we'd been millionaires. While I'd been working cleaning jobs that destroyed my knees and worried about how we'd pay for retirement care, we'd had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. "Why didn't you trust me with that information?" "Because." Another pause. "Because I was afraid you'd want to give it all away." "To who?" "The kids, charity, anyone with a sad story. You're soft-hearted, Ethel. You always have been. You'd see someone in need and want to help, and before we knew it, we'd be back to living paycheck to paycheck." Soft-hearted. He said it like it was a character defect, something shameful that needed to be managed. The same quality that had made me a good mother, a good neighbor, a good wife, was now the reason I couldn't be trusted with knowledge about my own financial security. Would that have been so terrible? Helping people? "Yes." The vehemence in his voice surprised both of us. "Yes, it would have been terrible. Do you know how long it took me to accumulate this much money? Do you know how carefully I had to invest? How many risks I had to calculate? I'm not going to watch it disappear because you feel sorry for everyone with a problem." There it was finally. The truth beneath all his talk about protection and burden and complicated financial matters. He was afraid I would give away his money. Not our money. His money. Accumulated through his genius and hard work. Threatened by my stupid feminine compassion. "So you let me suffer, rather than risk me being generous. I let you live the way you always lived, rather than risk you making foolish decisions that would impact both of us. The way I always lived. As if my poverty had been a choice, a preference, something I'd selected from a menu of lifestyle options. As if working multiple jobs and denying myself basic comforts had been a personal quirk rather than the result of economic necessity. What about the kids? Are they in your will? Of course they're in my will. They're my children. Am I in your will? The question hung between us like a sword. Robert's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, something that might have been guilt, before settling on defensive anger. What kind of question is that? The kind of question a wife asks her husband when she discovers he's been hiding millions of dollars from her for decades. You're my wife. Of course you're provided for. How am I provided for? Am I treated like an equal heir? Do I inherit everything if you die first? Or am I given some kind of allowance while the bulk goes to the kids? His silence was answer enough. I see. I folded the newspaper carefully, creasing each fold with the precision Robert used when he counted his secret money. So I'm not really your partner. I'm more like a dependent who needs to be managed and provided for, but not trusted with full ownership. It's not that simple. It seems very simple to me. You've decided I'm not smart enough, not trustworthy enough, not worthy enough to be treated as an equal in our marriage. You've recruited our children into agreeing with that assessment, and you've structured our entire financial life around the assumption that I'm essentially a child who needs a guardian. Ethel, you're twisting everything. No, Robert. You twisted everything. I'm just trying to straighten it out. That afternoon, while Robert was at what he claimed was a medical appointment, but which I now assumed was a meeting with his financial advisor, I called our neighbor Anna. She was 82, a widow who lived alone in the apartment next to ours, and who had always been kind to me in ways that seemed especially precious now. Anna, could I come over for tea? I need someone to talk to. Of course, dear. I'll put the kettle on. Anna's apartment was arranged almost exactly like ours, but it felt completely different. Where ours was cramped and shabby, hers was cozy and welcoming. She had plants in every window, books stacked on every surface, and photographs covering every wall. It was the home of someone who had claimed ownership of her own life. You look troubled, she said, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of Earl Grey. I told her everything. The hidden money, the family conspiracy, the decades of deception, the lawyer, the impossible choice between a marriage built on lies and the terrifying prospect of starting over at 76. Anna listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring into her teacup like she might find answers there. My husband died 12 years ago, she said finally. Harold. We were married 48 years and I thought I knew everything about him. Then he died. And I discovered that he'd been having an affair for the last 6 years of his life. I nearly choked on my tea. Anna, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. I never told anyone. But here's what I learned from that experience. The person I'd been married to for the last 6 years wasn't my husband. My husband was honest and faithful and treated me as an equal. The man who died in our bedroom was a stranger who looked like Harold and had Harold's social security number, but he wasn't the same person. What did you do? I grieved for my husband, and then I got angry at the stranger. And then I realized that I had a choice. I could spend my remaining years mourning the marriage I thought I'd had, or I could build a life based on who I actually was, not who someone else had decided I should be. She gestured around her apartment, at the books and plants and photographs that made it feel alive. This is my life now, not the life Harold wanted for me, not the life his girlfriend thought I deserved, but my life. And you know what I discovered? I like myself a lot better than I ever liked being Mrs. Harold Weinstock. But you were married for 48 years. Didn't that count for something? The first 42 years counted for everything. They were real. The last 6 years were a performance he put on while he lived his actual life somewhere else. Your 51 years with Robert include decades where he was performing the role of equal partner while actually treating you like hired help. How many of those years were real? The question hit me like cold water. How long had Robert been making unilateral decisions about our lives? How long had he been accumulating wealth while letting me believe we were struggling? How long had he been lying to me? And why had I been so willing to accept his explanations when they made me feel small and stupid? I don't know where to start, I admitted. Start with deciding what you want your life to look like. Not what Robert wants it to look like, not what the kids think you deserve, but what would make you happy. Then work backward from there. That evening, I sat in our living room with a legal pad, trying to imagine what I wanted. The exercise was harder than it should have been. For so many years, my wants and needs had been filtered through Robert's opinion of what was reasonable, appropriate, within our means. I'd gotten so used to scaling back my dreams that I'd almost forgotten how to dream at large scale. What did I want? I wanted to travel. Not just weekend trips to visit relatives, but real travel. Europe, like Robert and I had talked about when we were young. Italy, with its art and history and food that didn't come from cans or boxes. France, with its museums and cafes and countryside I'd seen in movies but never thought I'd experience in person. I wanted nice clothes, not expensive designer clothing, but well-made things that fit properly and made me feel attractive. I was tired of shopping at thrift stores out of necessity rather than choice. Tired of wearing shoes until they developed holes. Tired of making do with things that were almost right but not quite. I wanted to help our grandchildren with college expenses, the way I'd always wished we could, but Robert claimed we couldn't afford. I wanted to contribute to causes I cared about, to feel like my money was making a difference in the world rather than sitting in investment accounts accumulating more money for the sake of accumulation. I wanted a home that felt like a home, rather than a place where I served time. Not necessarily a mansion, but spaces that were comfortable and beautiful and reflected my taste, rather than what Robert thought was good enough for me. Most of all, I wanted to be treated as a person whose thoughts and feelings and desires mattered. I wanted to be consulted about decisions that affected my life. I wanted honesty instead of management, partnership instead of patronizing protection. When Robert came home that night, I was still sitting at the table with my legal pad, surrounded by years of bank statements and investment documents and loan papers that painted a picture of wealth hidden and opportunities denied. "What's all this?" he asked, hanging his jacket on the back of his chair. "Research. I'm trying to understand exactly what you've kept from me and for how long." He sat down across from me, but he didn't meet my eyes. "Ethel, I know you're upset, but..." "I'm past upset, Robert. I'm at the point where I need to make some decisions about my future." "What kind of decisions?" "The kind I should have been making all along, if I'd been given accurate information about our circumstances." I slid a bank statement across the table toward him. It showed quarterly dividend payments that exceeded what I'd earned in a year from my cleaning jobs. "This is from 2019, the year I was working nights at the medical building in Astoria, coming home exhausted every morning while you slept until noon. Do you remember that year?" He glanced at the paper and nodded reluctantly. "I destroyed my knees that year. I was 67 years old, crawling around on office floors with a bucket of cleaning supplies because I thought we needed the money. Meanwhile, you were earning more than my annual salary every 3 months just from investments you'd hidden from me. The medical building job was your choice. Based on information you gave me. You told me we were struggling. You complained about every expense, worried aloud about how we'd manage retirement, made me feel guilty about every dollar I spent on anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Of course I took the cleaning job. I thought we were poor." "We weren't poor." "No, you weren't poor. I was poor because you made sure I only had access to the money you thought I deserved, which was apparently just barely enough to survive. I pulled out another document, one that showed real estate investments worth more than most people's homes. This is from 2018, the year I skipped my mammogram because we couldn't afford the copay, the year I waited 8 months to see a cardiologist because the specialist fee seemed too expensive. Do you remember that year? His face was getting pale, but he didn't respond. I was walking around with a heart condition that could have killed me, Robert, because you decided I didn't need to know that we could afford any medical care I might need. Because you thought it was better for me to worry about money than for you to share accurate information about our finances. The doctor said your heart was fine. After 8 months of chest pains that kept me awake at night, 8 months of thinking I might be dying but not wanting to burden our family with expensive medical bills. I was standing now, though I didn't remember getting up. The papers were scattered across our small table like evidence at a crime scene, which in some ways they were. Evidence of years stolen from my life, experiences denied, opportunities missed, suffering that could have been prevented if my own husband had been willing to be honest with me. You let me suffer unnecessarily, I said quietly. For years, for decades. You watched me work jobs that injured my body and worry about expenses that weren't real problems, and deny myself things that we could easily afford. And you chose not to help me because you decided I couldn't handle the truth about our situation. I was trying to protect you. From what? From being able to live comfortably? From having choices? From being treated like an adult who could participate in decisions about her own life? From making mistakes that would cost us everything. What mistakes did you think I'd make? Giving money to every sob story. Buying things we don't need. Trusting the wrong people with investment advice. So instead, you made unilateral decisions about how much money I deserved access to, what information I could handle, which expenses were justified, and what kind of life I was sophisticated enough to live. You became my financial guardian without consulting me, and you've kept me in poverty while accumulating wealth that could have transformed both our lives. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the financial documents spread between us on our cheap table in our shabby kitchen. Finally, he said, I worked hard for this money, Ethel. I researched investments. I took calculated risks. I made smart decisions. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. I worked hard too, Robert. I worked multiple jobs to support this family when you couldn't or wouldn't. I raised our children and maintained our home and managed our budget and took care of your parents when they were elderly and handled all the household emergencies and social obligations and medical appointments that kept our lives running smoothly. But apparently, none of that work entitles me to honesty about our finances or input into major decisions, or even basic respect as an equal partner in our marriage. That's different. How is it different? What you did was domestic, family responsibilities. What I did was business, investment. Building wealth requires a different kind of intelligence. Domestic, family responsibilities, 51 years of marriage, and my contributions were domestic while his were business. My intelligence was sufficient for managing a household, but not for understanding investments. My work was family responsibility, while his was wealth building, as if families and wealth existed in completely separate universes. I'm going to ask you a question, Robert, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you respect me? The pause was too long, and that was answer enough. I mean, do you think I'm intelligent? Do you think I'm capable of understanding complicated information and making good decisions? Do you think I'm an equal partner in our marriage who deserves honesty and consultation about major decisions that affect both our lives? Another pause. Then, quietly, I think you're good at what you're good at. Which is what exactly? Taking care of people, managing day-to-day things. You're very nurturing. Nurturing. After decades of partnership, I'd been reduced to one characteristic that was apparently incompatible with financial intelligence or decision-making authority. I was a good caregiver, which meant I couldn't be trusted with investment information. I was nurturing, which meant I was too emotional for business decisions. And you don't think nurturing people are smart enough to understand money? I think you have different strengths than I do. Such as? You're good with people. You remember birthdays and anniversaries. You know how everyone in the family is doing. What the grandchildren like. Who needs extra attention. You make everyone feel welcome and cared for. And those skills are incompatible with understanding investments how, exactly? They're not incompatible. They're just different. I handle the money, you handle the family relationships. We each do what we're best at. Except I never agreed to that division of labor, Robert. You decided unilaterally that I would handle family relationships while being kept ignorant of our financial situation. You made that choice for both of us without consulting me, and you've maintained it for decades through deception. It's worked out fine. For who? It's worked out fine for you. Because you got to accumulate wealth while someone else handled all the emotional labor of maintaining family connections. It worked out fine for the kids, because they got the benefits of having a mother who organized their lives and a father who could secretly afford to help with major expenses. It worked out terribly for me, because I got to do all the nurturing while being treated like I was too stupid to know the truth about our financial security. I gathered up the financial documents, stacking them into a neat pile. I'm going to spend the weekend at Anna's apartment. I need time to think without you trying to manage my reactions or convince me that lies were really protection. Ethel, you're overreacting. Am I? My husband has hidden millions of dollars from me for decades, recruited our adult children into the deception, and made unilateral decisions about our entire financial future based on his assumption that I'm too stupid and impulsive to be trusted with accurate information. What would be an appropriate reaction to that situation? I never said you were stupid. You didn't have to say it, Robert. You demonstrated it by treating me like I was too incompetent to participate in decisions about my own life. That weekend at Anna's was the first time in years I'd felt like I could breathe. Her apartment was quiet in a peaceful way rather than the oppressive way our place had become. She made meals that were chosen for taste rather than economy, played music she enjoyed rather than whatever was least likely to irritate anyone else, and treated me like someone whose opinions and preferences mattered. "What are you thinking?" she asked over breakfast Saturday morning. I'm thinking I don't know who I am anymore. For so long, I've been thinking of myself as someone who couldn't afford things, someone who had to be careful with money, someone whose husband was stressed about our financial situation. Now I find out none of that was true. We've been wealthy for years, and I just didn't know. What else didn't you know? The question opened something inside me that I hadn't realized was locked. I don't know what I like. I know what I like within the constraints of what Robert thinks is reasonable or affordable or appropriate for someone like me. But I don't know what I'd choose if those constraints didn't exist. Such as? Food. I always cook things that are economical and that Robert will eat without complaining. But what if I could choose based on what I actually wanted to try? What if I could go to restaurants that served cuisine from countries I've never visited? Or buy ingredients that cost more than ground beef and chicken thighs? What else? Clothes. I shop at thrift stores and discount retailers, and I choose based on what's practical and affordable. But what would I wear if I could choose based on what made me feel beautiful? What colors do I actually like? What styles make me feel confident? What else? Travel. Robert always said we couldn't afford to go anywhere that required expensive accommodations or international flights. But what if we could? What if I could see art in person instead of just in books? What if I could eat authentic Italian food in Italy, or walk through museums in Paris, or see landscapes I've only imagined? What's stopping you from finding out? The question was so simple and so complicated at the same time. What was stopping me? Robert's opinion? His control over our finances? My own fear of making decisions I'd been told I wasn't qualified to make? I don't know how to start. You start small. You go to a restaurant you've always wanted to try and order something that sounds interesting, even if it's expensive. You go to a department store and try on clothes that appeal to you, even if they're not practical. You pick up travel brochures and start imagining where you'd go if money weren't a constraint. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I went shopping for pleasure instead of necessity. I took the subway into Manhattan and walked through Macy's, touching fabrics and trying on clothes that caught my eye rather than clothes that were on sale or marked down or practical for my daily routine. In the mirror of a department store dressing room, I saw myself wearing a soft blue dress that brought out the color of my eyes. It cost more than I usually spent on clothes in 6 months, but it made me look like someone worth looking at. Not someone's elderly wife or someone's aging mother, but a woman who existed for her own sake, who deserved beautiful things, who took up space in the world with confidence. I bought the dress. I also bought a lipstick in a color I'd always admired but never thought was appropriate for someone my age, and a small bottle of perfume that smelled like jasmine and possibility. On the subway ride back to Queens, I caught my reflection in the dark window and barely recognized myself. The woman looking back at me seemed more present, more awake, more real than the person who had been sleepwalking through her own life for the better part of 20 years. Sunday evening, I returned to our apartment. Robert was waiting in the living room, sitting in his usual chair with a beer and the remote control. He looked up when I entered, and something in his expression shifted when he saw me. "You look different." "I feel different." "What's in the shopping bag?" "Things I wanted, not things I needed or things that were practical or things that were on sale. Just things I wanted." I went to our bedroom and hung the blue dress in my closet next to all the shapeless, colorless, practical clothing I'd accumulated over the years. The contrast was startling. It was like seeing a flower in a field of weeds, a reminder that beauty and color and joy were choices rather than luxuries I couldn't afford. The next morning, I made an appointment with a financial advisor of my own. Not Robert's investment broker, not someone he'd selected and briefed on my limitations, but someone who would give me independent information about our assets and my options. I wanted to understand exactly what we owned, what my legal rights were, and what it would cost to establish financial independence if that's what I decided to do. The advisor, a woman named Jennifer Chen, met with me in her office in downtown Flushing. Her desk was covered with diplomas and certifications, and her manner was professional but warm. "Mrs. Patterson, I've reviewed the documents you provided, and I need to tell you that your husband has been less than forthcoming about your family's financial situation. Based on what I can see here, you have substantial assets that should have been generating income and growth for both of you for many years. How substantial? Conservative estimate? Between the investment portfolios, real estate holdings, and cryptocurrency assets, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $3 million in marital property." $3 million. Robert had lowballed even his confession, apparently unable to be completely honest even when caught in decades of deception. "What are my options?" "Several. You can work with your husband to restructure your finances so that you have equal access and control. You can establish separate accounts and divide assets equitably. If the marriage isn't salvageable, you can file for legal separation or divorce, and New York is an equitable distribution state, which means marital property should be divided fairly regardless of whose name is on the accounts." "What would you recommend?" "I'd recommend that you take time to decide what kind of life you want to build, and then choose the financial structure that supports those goals. But Mrs. Patterson, I want you to understand something important. This money belongs to you as much as it belongs to your husband. You were a full partner in this marriage, even if you weren't treated like one. You contributed to the family's stability and well-being in ways that made his investment activities possible. You have legal and moral rights to these assets, and you don't need anyone's permission to exercise those rights." That evening, I sat Robert down at our kitchen table again. This time, I was the one with documents spread out in front of me, and I was the one with information he hadn't been given. "I met with a financial advisor today," I said. "Jennifer Chen. She specializes in helping women understand their financial options after they discover their husbands have been making unilateral decisions about marital assets." Robert's face went through several expressions before settling on resignation. "What did she tell you?" "That we have closer to $3 million in assets, not the $2 million you mentioned. That, as your wife, I have legal rights to half of everything acquired during our marriage. That financial deception is grounds for legal separation in New York State, and that I have several options for how to proceed." "What options?" "I can work with you to restructure our finances so we both have equal access and control. I can establish my own accounts and take my share of our assets to manage independently. Or I can file for legal separation and let the courts determine how our property should be divided." "What do you want to do?" It was the first time in our entire marriage that Robert had asked me what I wanted to do about a financial matter. The question was so unprecedented that I almost didn't know how to respond. "I want to travel," I said finally. "I want to see Europe, like we used to talk about when we were young. I want to eat in restaurants that serve food I've never tried. I want to buy clothes that make me feel pretty. I want to help our grandchildren with college expenses. I want to contribute to causes I care about. I want to live like someone who has choices rather than someone who has to make do with whatever she's given. We can do those things. Can we? Because for the past 20 years, every time I've mentioned travel or suggested we eat somewhere nicer or wanted to help the kids with expenses, you've explained why it wasn't practical or affordable or appropriate. You've trained me to scale back my desires, to accept less, to be grateful for whatever you decided I deserved. I was being financially responsible. You were being financially controlling. There's a difference." I pulled out a sheet of paper where I'd written some calculations Jennifer had helped me with. "This shows what our investment income has been for the past 5 years. Just the dividends and interest, not counting capital gains or appreciation. That income alone would have supported a comfortable lifestyle for both of us, including travel and charitable giving and helping family members." Robert studied the numbers, and I could see him calculating, probably trying to figure out how to minimize the impact of the information. "But if we'd spent that money, it wouldn't have been available for reinvestment. The accounts wouldn't have grown at the same rate." "So what? We're 76 and 78 years old. Robert, we're not 25-year-olds building wealth for the future. We are the future. This is the time we were supposed to be enjoying the resources we accumulated during our working years. Instead, you've kept us living like poverty-stricken retirees while our money sits in accounts generating more money we'll never use. What if you get sick and need expensive care? Then we'll use some of our $3 million to pay for it. What if you get sick? What if one of us dies tomorrow? What if we spend the next 5 years living like paupers, only to discover that we wasted our last healthy years when we could have been seeing the world and helping our family and enjoying the fruits of decades of work and saving?" The question seemed to genuinely perplex him, as if he'd never considered that money might be for using rather than just accumulating. It occurred to me that Robert might have become so focused on building wealth that he'd forgotten why people build wealth in the first place. "I've made some decisions," I continued. "I'm opening my own bank account, and I'm transferring half of our liquid assets into it. I'm making myself a co-signer on all investment accounts, and I'm setting up automatic access to monthly income from our portfolios. I'm also planning a trip to Italy in the fall, and I'm going whether you come with me or not." Italy? Florence, Rome, maybe Venice. All the places we used to talk about visiting. I'm 76 years old. Robert, if I wait for you to decide I'm sophisticated enough for international travel, I'll be too old to enjoy it. How long would you be gone? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Long enough to see some art and eat some real Italian food and remember what it feels like to wake up excited about the day ahead. That sounds expensive. It is expensive. It's also easily affordable, given our financial situation. The question isn't whether we can afford it. The question is whether you're going to support my decision to use our money for something that will bring me joy, or whether you're going to try to talk me out of it like you've talked me out of everything else I've ever wanted. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the financial documents scattered between us. Finally, he said, "I could come with you." The offer surprised me. "Do you want to come with me?" "I don't know. Maybe. I've never really thought about traveling internationally." "Because you've been too busy hiding money from your wife?" "Because I've been focused on building security for our future." "Robert, we are secure. We're not just secure. We're wealthy. We have more money than most people dream of having. We could travel first class, stay in luxury hotels, eat at the best restaurants, and still have more money left over than we could spend in several lifetimes. The only thing preventing us from enjoying our wealth is your inability to believe that we deserve to enjoy it." "I deserve it," he said defensively. "I worked for it." "Then why have you been living like we're poor?" The question stopped him short. He sat there for several minutes, looking genuinely confused, as if he'd never considered the disconnect between accumulating wealth and actually benefiting from it. "I don't know," he said finally. "I guess I was afraid of losing it." "Losing it how?" "We're not talking about spending it all on one extravagant purchase. We're talking about using a small percentage of our assets to improve our quality of life. We're talking about letting our money work for us instead of us working for our money. What if the market crashes? Then we'd still have more money than most people have when the market is doing well. Robert, we could lose half our assets tomorrow and still be millionaires. We could make every financial mistake you're afraid I'll make and still live comfortably for the rest of our lives." That seemed to genuinely surprise him. "Really? Really? Your investment strategy has been so successful that we could afford to make significant mistakes and still be fine. We could afford to be generous with family members, to give money to causes we care about, to spend on things that bring us joy, and we'd still have more financial security than 99% of the population." I saw something shift in his expression then, like he was seeing our situation clearly for the first time. "I never thought about it that way. Because you've been so focused on accumulating and protecting wealth that you forgot why people want to be wealthy in the first place. Most people don't want money for the sake of having money, Robert. They want money because it buys freedom, choices, experiences, security, the ability to help people they love. You've been so successful at accumulating money that you could afford to be incredibly generous and still die wealthy. But instead, you've chosen to hoard resources we'll never use while denying both of us the experiences and opportunities that money was supposed to provide." Over the next few weeks, something began to change in our household. Robert started asking my opinion about things he'd never consulted me about before. He showed me investment statements instead of hiding them. He talked about travel possibilities instead of dismissing them as impractical. But the change felt tentative, performative, like he was trying to convince me to abandon my plans for independence rather than genuinely reconsidering his approach to our marriage and finances. When I mentioned setting up my own accounts, he found reasons why that would be complicated. When I talked about the Italy trip, he suggested less expensive alternatives that would be more practical for people our age. It became clear that Robert was willing to make small adjustments to avoid larger changes, but he wasn't ready to fundamentally alter the power dynamic that had characterized our marriage for decades. He was willing to share more information with me, but he still wanted to maintain ultimate control over financial decisions. He was willing to spend more money on our lifestyle, but only on expenses he approved of and in amounts he considered reasonable. The breakthrough came during a conversation about our grandchildren's college expenses. Our daughter Sarah had mentioned that their oldest, Emma, was looking at colleges, but would need financial aid to afford tuition at her preferred schools. "We should help with that," I told Robert over dinner one evening. "Help how?" "Pay her tuition, cover her room and board. Make sure she can go to whichever school she chooses without graduating with massive debt. Robert set down his fork with the careful precision that usually meant he was about to explain why something was impossible. That would cost a fortune. It would cost less than we earn in investment income in 6 months. But if we pay for Emma's education, we'll have to pay for all the grandchildren's educations. That's 6 kids, Robert. Even at state schools, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have millions of dollars, Robert. We could pay for all 6 grandchildren to attend private universities, and we'd still have more money left over than most families ever accumulate. But what if they don't appreciate it? What if free education makes them lazy or entitled? What if they choose expensive schools just because someone else is paying? What if they become doctors or teachers or engineers because they were able to get educations without going into debt? What if they remember their grandparents as people who made their dreams possible? What if our money actually does something meaningful instead of just sitting in accounts getting bigger for no purpose? There has to be a purpose. Money without purpose gets wasted. The purpose is enabling people we love to build better lives. The purpose is giving our grandchildren opportunities we didn't have. The purpose is using our resources to make the world a little bit better for people we care about. And what if they waste those opportunities? Then we'll have tried to help, and we'll still have more money than we can spend in our lifetimes. Robert, you're so afraid of making a mistake with our money that you're making the biggest mistake of all. You're not using it for anything that matters. That conversation seemed to crystallize something for both of us. Robert realized that his fear of financial mistakes had become more powerful than his desire to enjoy the fruits of his success. And I realized that I'd been asking for permission to use money I had every right to use. And that was never going to change unless I stopped asking and started acting. The next day, I opened my own checking account at a different bank. I didn't ask Robert's permission or explain my reasoning. I simply walked into Chase Bank with identification and documentation of our assets, and I opened an account in my name alone. Then I called Jennifer, my financial advisor, and set up automatic transfers that would give me direct access to investment income and a portion of our savings. When Robert discovered what I'd done, he was angrier than I'd seen him in years. You can't just take money without discussing it with me first. I didn't take your money, Robert. I took my money. Money I'm legally entitled to as your wife and partner. Money that should have been available to me for decades but wasn't because you decided I couldn't be trusted with it. This is theft. No, this is equity. For the first time in our marriage, I have access to financial resources that are rightfully mine. For the first time, I can make purchases and decisions without having to justify them to someone who's been lying to me about our financial situation for years. What are you going to do with it? Whatever I want. Maybe I'll buy clothes that aren't from thrift stores. Maybe I'll eat at restaurants you think are too expensive. Maybe I'll book that trip to Italy whether you come with me or not. Maybe I'll help Emma with her college expenses since her grandfather apparently thinks her education isn't worth investing in. You can't just make unilateral financial decisions. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. I can't make unilateral financial decisions? Robert, you've been making unilateral financial decisions for our entire marriage. You decided what information I could have, what expenses were justified, what kind of lifestyle I deserved, what portions of our assets I could access. You recruited our children into a conspiracy to keep me ignorant about our financial situation. You've made every major money decision for decades without consulting me. And now you're upset because I've gained access to money that was always legally mine? That's different. How is it different? Because I know what I'm doing with investments. I understand how to manage money properly. And I don't? You've never shown any interest in financial management before. Because you never gave me access to finances to manage, you can't exclude someone from participating in decisions and then claim their lack of experience justifies continued exclusion. That evening, I showed Robert the travel brochures I'd collected. Tours of Italy that included art museums and cooking classes and guided visits to historical sites. Accommodations that looked comfortable rather than economical. Itineraries that prioritized experience over budget. "These look expensive," he said, flipping through the glossy pages. "They are expensive. They're also exactly the kind of travel experience I've dreamed about for 30 years, but never thought I could afford. We could find less expensive tours. Why? We can easily afford these tours. The only reason to choose less expensive options would be if the expensive ones weren't worth the cost, not if we couldn't afford them. But if we spend money on expensive travel, we'll have less money for other things." "What other things, Robert? What are we saving money for? We're in our 70s. We're not buying houses or starting businesses or putting children through school. We're not accumulating wealth for future generations because we're not planning to leave our entire estate to charity. We're saving money to save money, which isn't actually a purpose. What if one of us needs extended medical care? Then we'll use some of our $3 million to pay for it. Even if one of us needed $1 million worth of medical care, we'd still have enough money left over to live comfortably and travel internationally and help our grandchildren with college expenses." "You're being reckless with our financial security." "No, Robert. I'm finally being realistic about our financial security. You've been so successful at building wealth that we could afford to be what you consider reckless and still be financially secure. We have enough money to take calculated risks, to be generous, to prioritize experiences over accumulation." 2 mornings later, I booked the Italy trip. First-class flights, luxury accommodations, guided tours of art museums and historical sites, cooking classes in Tuscany, wine tastings in small villages I'd only read about in books. It was everything I'd dreamed of, and more expensive than any vacation we'd ever taken. When I told Robert what I'd done, he stared at the confirmation emails in silence for a long time. "The total cost is more than we used to spend in a year," he said finally. "The total cost is less than we earn in investment income in 6 weeks. And Robert, this isn't just about the money. This is about finally prioritizing my happiness and my dreams instead of always deferring them for some imaginary future emergency. What if I don't want to go to Italy? Then I'll go alone. I'm 76 years old. If I wait for you to want to share experiences with me, I'll be too old to enjoy them." "You'd really travel internationally by yourself at your age?" "Millions of people travel internationally at my age, Robert. Age doesn't disqualify someone from seeing the world unless they let it." That seemed to surprise him. I realized he'd been thinking of us as elderly people who were too old for adventure, rather than as people who had finally accumulated the resources to pursue the experiences we'd dreamed about when we were younger. "I might want to come with you," he said tentatively. "You're welcome to come, but I'm going whether you come or not. This trip isn't contingent on your participation or approval." Something shifted in his expression then, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You're really different now." "I'm not different, Robert. I'm just finally acting like someone who has choices instead of someone who has to accept whatever other people decide she deserves." The weeks leading up to the Italy trip were strange. Robert seemed torn between wanting to control my plans and wanting to participate in them. He'd make suggestions about more economical accommodations, then ask what we'd be doing in Florence. He'd complain about the cost of first-class flights, then research Italian restaurants he thought we should try. Finally, 3 weeks before departure, he said, "I want to come with you." "Why?" "Because I don't want you to see Italy without me." "You've had 50 years to plan trips with me, Robert. Why now?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking out our kitchen window at the fire escape and brick walls that had framed our view for decades. "Because I think I've been afraid of the wrong things." "What do you mean?" "I was afraid of losing money or making bad investments or spending resources on things that wouldn't last. But I think I should have been afraid of not living, of letting fear keep us from enjoying what we'd worked for, of wasting the years when we were still healthy enough to travel and try new things." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd gotten from Robert in decades, and it wasn't even a direct apology. but it was acknowledgement that his approach to our finances and our marriage had been flawed, which was more insight than I'd expected from him. "You can come," I said. "But I'm not changing the itinerary to accommodate your preferences. This trip is planned around what I want to see and do and experience. If you want to participate, you're welcome, but you don't get to modify it to make it more comfortable or economical or practical." That seems fair. Fair. After decades of making unilateral decisions about our finances and our lifestyle, Robert was finally acknowledging that I was entitled to make some unilateral decisions of my own. The Italy trip transformed both of us, but in different ways. For me, it was confirmation that I was capable of navigating the world independently, that I could enjoy experiences that were completely outside my previous comfort zone, that I deserved beauty and adventure and luxury. For Robert, it seemed to be a revelation that money could buy things worth having, that spending resources on experiences could be as valuable as saving them for theoretical future needs. In Florence, we stood in front of Michelangelo's David, and I watched Robert's face change as he experienced art he'd only seen in photographs. In Tuscany, we took a cooking class where we learned to make pasta from scratch, and I saw him laugh in a way I hadn't seen in years. In Rome, we ate at restaurants that served food that was a revelation, and I watched him discover flavors and textures he'd never experienced. "This is what money is for," I said one evening as we sat on the terrace of our hotel in Venice, watching the sunset paint the canals in shades of gold and pink. "What do you mean?" "This feeling, this experience of being somewhere beautiful, eating food that tastes incredible, seeing art that takes your breath away, feeling like the world is full of possibilities. This is why people want to be wealthy, Robert. Not to have big numbers in investment accounts, but to have access to experiences and opportunities and beauty that make life feel worth living." I never thought about it that way. Because you were so focused on accumulating money that you forgot money is supposed to be a tool, not an end goal. You became so successful at making money that you forgot what you were making it for. When we returned from Italy, something had shifted in our relationship. Not everything. Robert was still prone to questioning expenses and making unilateral decisions, but I was no longer willing to defer to his judgments about what I could afford or what kinds of experiences were appropriate for someone my age. I used my own money to help Emma with her college expenses, and when Robert objected, I reminded him that it was money I was legally entitled to spend however I chose. I donated to causes I cared about, bought clothes that made me feel attractive, ate at restaurants that served cuisine I wanted to try. I was learning, at 76, how to prioritize my own preferences and desires, instead of automatically deferring to Robert's opinions about what was reasonable or practical. The biggest test came 6 months after our return from Italy, when Sarah called to tell us that she and her husband were considering divorce. Their marriage had been strained for years by financial pressures and career demands, and they were struggling with counseling costs and legal fees. "We could help them," I told Robert that evening. "Help how?" "Pay for marriage counseling. Cover legal fees if they decide to divorce. Help Sarah with housing costs if she needs to move out. Make sure our daughter has the resources she needs to make the best decisions for her family, instead of being forced into choices by financial constraints." That could cost tens of thousands of dollars. It could cost $100,000, and we'd still be millionaires. "Robert, this is our daughter. If we can't use our money to help our children through major life crises, what kind of parents are we? What if the money doesn't solve their problems? Then at least we'll have tried to help, and our daughter will know that her parents valued her happiness and well-being more than they valued keeping money in investment accounts. What if helping them makes them dependent on us? What if not helping them makes them feel abandoned and unsupported during one of the most difficult periods of their lives?" After a long pause, Robert said, "How much do you think we should offer?" It was the first time he'd asked for my input on a major financial decision instead of telling me what his decision was. It was the first time he'd treated me like a partner whose judgment he respected, rather than a dependent whose requests he evaluated. Whatever they need, I said. We start with counseling costs and see what else comes up. We don't set arbitrary limits based on what we think they should need. We just help, and we keep helping until they don't need help anymore. That's a blank check. That's what parents do for their children when they have the resources to do it. We ended up spending $47,000 helping Sarah through her divorce. Counseling, legal fees, security deposits on a new apartment, childcare costs while she went back to school for additional certification that would improve her earning potential. It was more money than we'd ever spent on anything except our apartment, and it was the best investment we'd ever made. Not because it guaranteed any particular outcome, Sarah's marriage wasn't salvageable despite months of counseling, but because it allowed our daughter to make decisions based on what was best for her family rather than what she could afford. It allowed her to end an unhappy marriage with dignity rather than being trapped by financial desperation. It allowed our grandchildren to maintain stability during a difficult transition instead of being forced into poverty because their parents couldn't afford legal representation. Most importantly, it allowed us to be the kind of parents we'd always wanted to be, but couldn't afford to be when we thought money was scarce. For the first time in our relationship, we were able to help our child without considering the cost, without weighing her needs against our own financial security, without making her feel guilty for requiring assistance. "Thank you," Sarah said when the worst of the crisis had passed and she was settled in her new apartment with a job she enjoyed and a custody arrangement that worked for everyone. "I know it was a lot of money." "It wasn't too much," I told her. "It was exactly the right amount. And Sarah, I want you to know that your father and I are both proud of how you handled a difficult situation. You made good decisions. You prioritized your children's well-being, and you asked for help when you needed it. That's exactly what we hope you would do." I felt terrible asking for money. "You didn't ask for money, sweetheart. You asked for help. There's a difference." After we hung up, Robert said, "That felt good." What felt good? Being able to help. Being able to solve problems with money instead of creating problems by not having money. Is that what we were doing before? Creating problems by not having money we actually did have? I think so. He was quiet for a moment. I think I was so worried about not having enough money that I forgot we were supposed to be using money to make life better. For ourselves and for people we love. For ourselves and for people we love, he agreed. That conversation happened 2 years ago. Since then, Robert and I have traveled to France, Spain, and Morocco. We've helped all 6 grandchildren with college expenses. We've donated to causes we care about, eaten at restaurants that prioritize experience over economy, and moved to a beautiful apartment in Astoria, with a view of the East River and space for our grandchildren to visit comfortably. Robert still struggles with spending money on things he considers unnecessary, but he no longer tries to prevent me from spending money on things I consider important. We've found a balance that allows both of us to feel financially secure while actually using our resources to improve our quality of life and support people we care about. More importantly, we've learned to treat each other as equal partners in our marriage. Robert consults me about investment decisions now, and I consult him about major expenses. We both have access to all financial information, and we both have discretionary funds we can use without needing approval from the other person. It's not perfect. 50 years of unequal financial dynamics don't disappear overnight, and Robert still sometimes acts like wealth requires his protection rather than our enjoyment. But it's dramatically better than the relationship we had when I was living in artificial poverty while he accumulated secret wealth. Most importantly, I've learned that I don't need anyone's permission to prioritize my own happiness and well-being. I don't need to justify wanting beautiful experiences or comfortable surroundings or the ability to help people I love. I've spent enough of my life deferring my dreams to other people's opinions about what I deserve. Last month, I started planning our next trip. Japan, in the spring, to see the cherry blossoms and experience a culture completely different from anything we've encountered before. When I showed Robert the travel brochures, he didn't ask about the cost. Instead, he asked what we'd be doing in Tokyo and whether I thought he'd enjoy Japanese food. "I think you'll enjoy trying something completely new," I told him. "I think you'll discover that you're more adventurous than you used to believe." "I think you're right," he said. "I think I'm more adventurous than I used to be." What I've learned from this experience is that financial deception is a form of emotional abuse, even when it's motivated by good intentions. What I've learned is that partnership requires honesty, and marriage requires treating each other as equals capable of making good decisions. What I've learned is that money without purpose is just numbers on a page. But money used to create experiences and help people and build a life worth living is one of the most powerful tools we have. What I've learned is that you're never too old to change the fundamental dynamics of a relationship, and you're never too old to start prioritizing your own happiness and dreams. I'm 78 years old now. Robert is 80. We don't know how many more years we have to travel and experience new things and enjoy the wealth we've accumulated over decades of work and saving. But we know that those years will be spent living fully, rather than hoarding resources for some imaginary future that may never come. If you're in a relationship where someone else controls access to financial resources, where major decisions are made without your input, where your dreams are dismissed as impractical or inappropriate, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve honesty, partnership, respect, and the right to participate in decisions about your own life. You're never too old to demand better treatment, to establish financial independence, to pursue experiences that bring you joy. Money is a tool for building the life you want, not a score to be accumulated for the sake of accumulation. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old or too inexperienced or too emotional to handle financial information. Don't let anyone treat you like you're not sophisticated enough for the life your money could buy. Don't let anyone keep you in artificial poverty while accumulating wealth that could transform your experience of the world. Have you or someone you know ever discovered that a spouse or partner was hiding significant assets? Have you ever found yourself living like you couldn't afford experiences that were actually well within your financial means? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us realize that we're not alone, and that financial deception is more common than we might think. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. It helps me reach other people who might need to hear that they deserve honesty, partnership, and the right to enjoy the resources they've helped to create. Thank you for listening to my journey from deception to liberation. Your life is worth living fully, regardless of your age. Your dreams are worth pursuing, regardless of what other people think you deserve. Your happiness matters, and you don't need anyone's permission to prioritize it. Thank you for taking this journey with me.